Hello, welcome back. Now, this is a story I've been following for a long time, which is the story of the Darlington Five. Now, this is 5 NHS nurses who were forced out of their changing rooms and into this tiny little cupboard, this humiliating locker room, after complaining about a transgender colleague. The Darlington Memorial Hospital nurses launched legal action in June for alleged sexual harassment against County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation. They claim their bosses ignored their concerns about having to share a changing room with a colleague born biologically male who now identifies as a woman. Let's get to the bottom of this, shall we? And bring into the conversation two of the nurses themselves, Bethany, Hutchison and Lisa, Lockey. Ladies, it's fantastic to have you on the programme. Ladies who actually are ladies and deserve to have their own changing rooms, may I just add. Talk to me, first of all, because, you know, what was this colleague of yours like who came and said, look, I identify as a woman, I want to get changed in the changing room? Was he discreet? Was he sensitive? Or was he a bit creepy?
Oh, there was no discussion prior to us just finding him in the changing room. So we weren't sort of introduced, oh, this is, you know, this is a colleague who is going to be, who is transgender, who's going to be using the changing room. There was none of that. It was just kind of, we were left to just go in and find him ourselves. Okay. And, you know, for some women, it was a real shock, you know. I mean, fortunately for me personally, one of my colleagues had already told me, so I was aware that it was going on. Whereas, you know, some of our international girls, they knew nothing of it and were just walking in, you know, mid-stripping off and then realising there was a man in there with them, which it was really quite, like, terrifying for them.
Yeah, oh my God, do you know, it's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that perspective, given that we do have so many NHS staff from other countries where culturally that would be utterly horrific. Not that I think is non-horrific in our country, frankly. Look, I don't know anything about this male nurse. I don't play the games of pronouns and gender identity. I refuse to. I wish more of the world got on board. But in the report I'm reading here in the Mail, it says that, you know, some vulnerable women who have suffered sexual abuse were having panic attacks after having to get undressed in front of this 26-year-old transgender nurse who apparently stared at their breasts and lingered in the room. I mean, is it fair to say that this man was not acting with due discretion and sensitivity?
Well, apparently so, yes. I mean, that's the alleged thing. That's what women have brought to us and have discussed with us. I think for me the concern is though that we often get so hung up about this transgender individual when actually we are advocating for safe spaces for women, and the policy change that is in the NHS and in wider society, which allows for men to self-ID as women, that puts women at a huge risk, because we can't tell who is a predator and not a predator. And I'm not saying that this individual is a predator at all. You know, but I am saying that there is potential for people to abuse this loophole in the policies that are in play.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, if all it takes is someone to say, I now identify as a woman, to get into toilets and changing rooms, and you could get autogynephiliacs, men with fetishes, you know, all sorts of horrific people who want to opportunise upon that situation. No one's saying that this man is any of those things, but you're right, it is about the principle. So what happened when you went and reported this and said, look, we don't think this is on?
Yeah, so we first raised it with a sister, and the sister brought it to senior managers, and the result of that meeting was that, yes, we understand the risk that the women are bringing up, but unfortunately there's nothing that's going to be done because of the inclusiveness of the trust. So nothing is going to be done. And then we tried to pursue it with HR, and at every turn we were really told that it's being discussed in theatres or it's being discussed with HR. There was no sort of conclusion to it. There was no assistance in it. There was no help or support. We just had to get on. So it trundled on for a year, and that's when we took further action.
And then what happened? So you take further action. How did this result in you ending up being sent away, excommunicated into a tiny little changing room just for you?
Do you want to go?
It sort of, it just kind of happened overnight, really. So we'd spoken to the media. We'd put the story forward anonymously to start with, and then there was a risk of sort of, we didn't want other transgender colleagues to maybe be accused of inappropriate behaviour and stuff, and we felt it was probably important to actually identify ourselves. So just after then, we just came in one day, and we'd had a message sent to say we had a new changing room. Our sister's office had been cleared out, and was now a locker room. So there was a keypad on the door. So we were going in there to get changed. There was no lockers actually in it to start with. They've now put 6 lockers in there, but it's not private particularly. There's kind of it opens onto the door of the door opens onto the corridor right opposite a side room. Lots of staff go past this room, so if you're mid undress, someone happens to come in to open the door, you're on full show. It's just a small square room.
Yes, and I think the Trust would argue that they've done something about this to appease us. They've also provided us with a sort of closed-off cubicle, which is in a discharge office. We use that room for discharging patients and having meetings, and all sorts of people can go in there to have chats. So it's not really appropriate. But they think that they've done something to appease us, which actually they haven't, because the policy is still in place, which allows for people who self-identify to access that changing room. And that's the point. They haven't actually solved the problem. They've just removed us and ostracised us from a changing room that actually we're entitled to be in.
Yeah, I mean, one assumes that many of the other nurses would rather come into your tiny little makeshift changing room than they would share with this man. I mean, why on earth wouldn't they just put him in the makeshift changing room and say, look, if he doesn't want the indignity of using the male changing room, and women are not entirely sure whether they're comfortable having a male in their changing room, then perhaps actually the easiest way of going about things is saying to that person, look, in terms of sensitivity and discretion and finding the best solution, you can have your own changing room.
Yeah, you would think that, but actually I think their view is that it's easier to bully us women into removing us from that changing room. And I would have hoped that our colleague would have had empathy towards us. We've got women in there who've been abused.
There's women who've had, surgery for breast cancer. Yeah. International nurses who, don't want to take their clothes off in front of any man that isn't their husband. Yeah. There's lots of reasons that we don't want a man in the changing room.
I totally agree. I don't understand. How is it that, we fought so hard, we've had the blimmin' suffragettes, we finally think we're getting to a position in the world where women, have a fairly decent lot, and all of a sudden men are deciding that they want to call themselves a woman and enter our spaces, and when we say, well, look, we're not very comfortable with this because actually it's our safety. It's our potential safety and our dignity that's compromised. This isn't about wokery. This isn't about political correctness. This is about safety, integrity and dignity, which is what all women and all human beings deserve, that actually men are shouting over us and they're winning.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I think what we've discussed as well is that in the NHS, we risk assess everything. As soon as a patient walks on the ward, they have a wristband on and we do an assessment on them. They have not risk assessed this at all. They don't see the potential risk that this poses.
And what's interesting, I was watching your show the other day, and Julia was discussing it with an ex-nurse, I think it was, and they were saying about how the NHS had a policy in place that stopped transgender patients being mixed in bays, with the opposite gender. So why is it okay to let us just share a changing room with a man when the patients, if they're not doing it to the patients? I don't understand the reasoning behind that.
We were given a reason by HR.
We were, yeah.
Who said that public law is different to health law, employment law.
Employment law, yeah.
And that was the reason behind it.
Do you know, you would think, wouldn't you, when it comes to the medical profession, whether you're in HR and it's public law or health law, that the very people who should know a thing or two about what makes a man and what makes a woman are the experts in human anatomy. I'm absolutely appalled by this. Ladies, what's your next step?
Well, we're just waiting we're hoping to try and have a meeting with Wes Streeton to discuss things, because he suggested getting together and discussing things to try and find a way forward. So we would love to have a discussion with him to try and see if we can find a way around it. We don't want to make transgender people feel, you know, uncomfortable or outed. We want them to be treated fairly as well. But at the moment, the way things are going, it's us who have been, you know, on the door.
Well, you're right. Do you know what? Nobody benefits from this. And actually, if we're going to talk about trans people actually feeling safe, which is what the argument often comes down to, the minute you start having an uptick in incidents of really dodgy men putting on dresses who want to go into ladies' spaces for nefarious reasons and horrific crimes start being committed, the backlash is going to be against the trans community. I cannot see that this helps anybody at all. Bethany, Lisa, it's been fantastic having you on the programme, and keep fighting the good fight. Many women out there are cheering you on, that is for sure. And perhaps many men who identify as women who at least have a shred of common sense and a bit of empathy.